Kia ora everyone. Welcome to the fourth talk in the Blood Cancer Patient Forum series. My name is Helen McDermott and I'm one of the support service coordinators based here in Christchurch. So we continue this month's theme of looking after your mental well-being. And today we'll be addressing mindfulness, really what it is, how it works for you, compassion and mindset changes. But before I introduce our speaker, I'm just going to, just a reminder that you can ask questions. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, so just type your questions into that. So today I have great pleasure in introducing Shaun Bowler. You will have met him a couple of weeks ago in his talk, Wellness and Identity. So Shaun is a registered psychologist, he's a yoga teacher, a fitness and exercise professional, and he has also a great passion for a holistic approach to wellness, including body, mind, and wider social connections. So sit back, get comfortable, and enjoy what I know will be a fabulous talk. Thank you, Shaun.
Oh, thank you, Helen. Kia ora tātou, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. Some of you may have attended the previous workshop a couple of weeks ago, and so it's a privilege for me to come back and present again. And for those of you who don't know anything about me, I am, as Helen said, a registered psychologist, and I am here in Tamaki Makaurau. I live here with my wife Joy. We have 2 adult children who both live overseas, and I've got this lifelong passion in wellness and psychology and behavior and the connection between the mind and the body, which is particularly topical in the modern world. In fact, it's been topical for thousands of years, as we shall see. And I've also got a strong interest in neuroscience. And so we bring those things together in the topics that we've got today. And as Helen said, I'm also a yoga teacher as well. And so this kind of complements the whole interest that I have. And I'm going to share my screen so that we've got the slides up there. And so this particular topic really speaks to me. I hope you can all see that first slide. The title of our session today is Mindfulness, Compassion and Mindset Changes. And so we're going to unpack some of those things in a little bit more detail as we go through. So if you want to know anything more about me, you can go to my website, shaunbowler.com. There's a little bit there. Another thing you might find when you go there is, because it's a little bit unfinished and unpolished, that I have a kind of I quite like design and creating things and doing things. So I'm building the website myself, and if it looks a bit rough around the edges, that's why. But you're welcome to go there and see some of the things that I do and I'm interested in, and so on. Okay, so when we're talking about mindfulness and self-compassion and yoga and things like that, I guess those topics are really a meeting of Eastern traditions, very old, 5,000-year-old Eastern traditions and Western traditions, and they've kind of collided in the 20th century and forward into the 21st century. And one of the things that is part of that theme of East meets West is this idea of compassion and loving kindness. And in the Buddhist tradition, which is one of the ancient traditions that we'll talk a little bit about today, there's this concept of metta bhavana, loving kindness. And if any of you have practiced Buddhist style meditation as a way of becoming more mindful, you might have practiced the metta bhavana practice, which is all about having compassion for all sentient beings, including yourself, people that you like and very close to, people who you feel neutral about, and people who you may actively struggle to like. And so when you do this loving kindness practice, you work through those 3 categories of people, and then the 4th category of person who you bring this loving kindness to in your meditation is yourself. And we're going to practice that today. So I'm not saying that the tradition of compassion and loving kindness is unique to Buddhism. Of course, Christianity has a very strong tradition of of compassion, and so do many other traditions, philosophies, religions, moral codes, and so on. I'm just using this as an example. And part of the reason why I use the Buddhist example is it's one of the oldest of codifying this practice of compassion and kindness. It goes back, 3,000 or 4,000 years. A second thing in this East meets West thing is this idea of non-dualism. Okay, now that sounds a little bit technical, but if I said the word tantra to you, I don't know how many of you have heard of tantric things. When we hear tantra, it's often associated with things like tantric sex, and so that word conjures up ideas of all sorts of, sexual activities, etc. But that's not what tantra is about. That's kind of something that the West has taken out of that philosophical tradition and gone to town with. The reality is that tantra is a very ancient philosophical tradition from India. It arose in southern India and then moved to northern India. And what it literally means, what that word tantra literally means in Sanskrit is, or in English, it's a Sanskrit word, means to weave, or threads, if you like. So if you think of tantra as being like a fabric of threads interwoven, okay? And so what does that mean? Well, in the context of non-dualism, it means that, and this philosophy of non-dualism means that good stuff is kind of woven up with bad stuff all the time. So even our sweetest experience can be tinged with sadness. And even our saddest and deepest suffering can be tinged with some kind of sweetness. So this idea that good and bad are kind of really tied up with each other is kind of what Tantrism is about. It says that there's good and bad in everything, right? And that's a real contrast with the kind of the Western tradition where we see heaven up here and hell down there, and these things don't kind of meet, and everything's either good or bad. And this was really brought to mind by a philosopher called Descartes, who you might have heard of, René Descartes, who was a French philosopher and mathematician in the 17th century. And he said something very famous that you might have heard, which was, Descartes, there is a picture of him, which is that I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. And this is really important because this came to dominate the Western view of the mind and body for quite a long time. So in saying that, he was saying that what makes us human is our capacity to think, right? And in doing so, he took the mind out of the body. The mind became the human bit and the body got left behind, right? Whereas this is a real contrast with this ancient tradition of dualism, of non-dualism, which said actually the mind and the body are the same thing. You can't have a mind unless you've got a body, right? So why is this all important? Well, here's the problem. The suffering that we have with our well-being, and particularly our mental health in the 20th and 21st century, is because our thoughts have gone crazy. And because we start to think that we exist, our thoughts are true. The reality is that the thoughts that we have may or may not be true. And the ancient Eastern philosophers who came up with this non-dual philosophy kind of knew this. They actually knew that thinking was the problem most of the time when it came to suffering. And strangely enough, this is exactly what modern neuroscience has come up with. I said I was interested in neuroscience. Well, I've got bookshelves full of books about how the brain works. And it turns out that the modern researchers are saying, hey, the big problem that we have is that the health of our bodies dictates the health of our minds. So the first thing that you want to do if you need to move your mood is to move your body. Okay, so now we've come full circle. We're back to that non-dualist kind of philosophy where you have to look after both the mind and body at the same time. So what's all this got to do with mindfulness, happiness, self-compassion? Well, here's the thing. If the body is the key to mental well-being, And if your physical health is suffering, that could be a bit of a problem, couldn't it? So you start to think, well, I can't be happy because, my body's not working. Well, here's the thing. There's always something you can do to move your mental state, even if you're not fully well. And that is because one of the best ways into moving your mood is working with the breath in a mindful way. And anybody who has a body is breathing. So there's always stuff that you can do through your body to shift your mind and shift your mood. Okay, so let's move on. We talked a bit about compassion. That's enough philosophy and ancient philosophy and metaphysics and all the rest of it. But let's have a look at the compassion, because that's one of the topics we're going to talk about. What is it? Well, quite simply, it is a kind, friendly presence in the face of difficulty. And the key word here is difficulty. Okay, you cannot have compassion unless you have difficulty. So you need the difficulty to have the compassion. And this idea of compassion means accepting difficulty, the difficulty of others or the difficulty in your own life and for yourself. And compassion means turning toward the difficulty. Compassion means turning toward the difficulty rather than running away from it. And it implies this general desire for all people and all beings to be free from suffering. And when I say all people and all beings, I mean it. Okay, so that includes me, includes you. So we not only have compassion for others, but we have compassion for ourselves. And that means that we turn to our own difficulties as part of that compassion process. I'm going to unpack that a little bit more. We open our hearts to the difficulty, we open our hearts to others, and we open our hearts to ourselves. So, what's the difference between compassion and self-compassion? And why is compassion important, or why is self-compassion important? Well, it's important because people who have greater self-compassion, and you can measure this, you can measure people's self-compassion. You can ask them questions and observe them and find out their self-compassion. Those of us who have more self-compassion have a greater satisfaction in life. And those of us who have more self-compassion have increased resilience in the face of adversity or stressful life events like divorce or health crises or blood cancer. And so self-compassion is not just this nice fluffy thing to have. It's actually a really important tool to become more resilient and to manage through adversity. And the person who knows most about self-compassion, or one of the people who knows a lot about self-compassion in this world, is a woman called Kristin Neff. And she is a doctor in psychology. She teaches at the University of Texas. And she has a website there, which you can see, selfcompassion.org. I strongly recommend that you go and have a look at this if this is something of interest to you. And she had personal experiences around adversity. She had the sort of stuff that goes on for a lot of us in our 20s, relationship issues, identity issues. Who am I going to end up with? What am I going to be successful in my career? Am I going to finish my studies? All the things that a lot of us wrestle with, where do I live? And she got very, very stressed about it. And so she took up meditation as a way of managing that. And once she got into this love and kindness meditation that I told you about, where you wish others well and then you wish yourself well, she said, well, actually, maybe there's something in the self-compassion. So that became her PhD topic. She then became an international expert in self-compassion, and she spent her whole life working in that area since. So what is self-compassion? Well, I'll tell you what it's not. It's not self-pity. Okay, it's not the same as self-pity. So when we feel self-pity, It's a very self-centered thing. It's like, why is this happening to me? It's not fair. It shouldn't be happening to me. And what happens is when we kind of personalize that and kind of wallow in that self-pity, we become more immersed in our own problems. And so what that does is it actually increases our sense of separation from others, because we start to see ourselves as special. This is happening to me, as opposed to actually it could be happening to a whole bunch of other people as well. And so when we have the self-pity, we tend to emphasize feelings of separation from others and exaggerate the extent of the personal suffering. This is personal to me. So it's not self-pity. It's not self-esteem either. Okay, so with self-esteem, that's like a global evaluation of how crash hot you are. Okay, so if I've got high self-esteem, it's because I think I'm just the duck's nuts, and I've achieved so much, and I'm, really at the top of my game, and I'm a really worthwhile person. And so I've got this mental medal cabinet of how great I am. And the problem with self-esteem is that it relies on our latest success and failure. It relies on what you've actually achieved. And so it's a bit vulnerable, because you might lose that crash hot job, or you might get a serve from somebody who tells you should know better, and all of a sudden you're not, Mahatma Gandhi or Mother Teresa. And so your self-esteem goes down. So self-esteem fluctuates depending upon what you're achieving and how much feedback you're getting from other people. Self-compassion, on the other hand, doesn't, because you don't have to achieve anything for it. You don't have to do anything to deserve self-compassion, because every single one of us deserves self-compassion. Right? You don't have to be like one of life's winners. You don't have to make a lot of money. You don't have to have lots of medals in the cabinet. Everybody deserves self-compassion. That's the definition of it. You deserve self-compassion, and you feel self-compassion because you're worth it. Okay? Everybody's worth it. And what's more, it actually allows greater clarity, because you can acknowledge your personal failings. I'm not very good at organising. I'm freaking hopeless. I mean, this is true. It's my wedding anniversary today. I often forget those kind of important dates. Now, if I really wanted to beat myself up, I could, right? But here's the thing, with self-compassion, I can say, well, actually, I'm just not that good with calendars and dates. I struggle with dates, and so you can treat yourself kindly with that sort of stuff. Doesn't mean that I can, forget about it entirely. I might want to work on it, but it means that I'm not going to think of myself as not a worthwhile person because I don't remember this date or that date. Okay, and so I don't need to hide these things because I can forgive myself. It's not dependent on external circumstances. So this is this aspect of self-compassion, allowing for greater self-honesty as well. Okay. And it's always available to you. So it doesn't matter, because what you do doesn't make you any more or less deserving of self-compassion. So that means you can always have compassion for yourself. Okay. So this is how Kristen Neff, Dr. Neff, describes it. She says, with self-compassion, we can give ourselves the same kindness and care we'd give to a good friend. Okay? We can give ourselves the same kindness and care we give to a good friend. So when one of the key researchers in this area, another neuroscientist by the name of Richard Davidson, decided to take a bunch of crack Buddhist monks to Chicago to find out how they meditate, he flew them over to the US. This was back in the late 70s and early 80s. And they'd never been out of Dharamsala in northern India. And these Tibetan monks went to the university lab and he wired them up with all these wires. And then he asked them, what they thought of America. And they said, we just can't understand it. We can't understand how mean you are to yourselves, how hard you are on yourselves. And they, these were monks who they'd spent their whole life in service to others and in meditation, but they just couldn't believe how hard Westerners were on themselves. I've got to be something different. I've got to be slimmer. I've got to be fitter. I've got to work harder. I've got to get a better result. I've got to get a better grade. And so they were always beating themselves up. And I think a lot of us do a little bit of that, don't we? So imagine if you actually talk to yourself in your head the way you, or imagine if you talk to your best friend the way you talk to yourself in your head. Oh, I'm hopeless. Imagine if you went to your best friend and said, oh, you're hopeless. You know, people are always putting themselves down. And these monks just couldn't understand why. Anyway, so that's a bit about self-compassion. So what are the three components of self-compassion? Well, the first one is self-kindness versus self-judgment. So self-kindness means not judging yourselves, but actually being warm and understanding towards yourself when you're suffering, or towards ourselves, or when we feel inadequate, or when we fail, rather than beating ourselves up. The second component of it is, oops, I stopped sharing for some reason there. I clicked on the wrong thing. I'm going to share again somewhere. Maybe it was here. No, maybe it was here. Let's try that. Everyone see the screen again? Good. Okay. So the second component of it is common humanity versus isolation. So the second component of self-compassion is recognizing, and remember I talked about self-compassion not being the same as self-pity. This explains it. So self-compassion is understanding our common humanity. So it's not just us that's suffering or having a hard day or a hard life. It's actually part of the shared human experience, something that we all go through rather than something that's simply just happening to me. And so realizing that you're not alone will reduce the loneliness that comes with the suffering. And in doing so, reduce the suffering. And that's the whole point of self-compassion, I've got to say. So the third component of self-compassion is mindfulness over identification. So remember I said the first part of compassion is acknowledging difficulty. So part of mindfulness is turning towards the pain. It's acknowledging the difficulty. It's realizing that we have negative emotions, but we don't either suppress those emotions or exaggerate them. Okay, so self-pity exaggerates them. Suppressing them is walking away, running, it's being in denial. So mindfulness is about not ignoring our pain and feeling compassionate about it, but at the same time, not over-identifying with it and saying that is all there is to life and nobody else is going through this, okay? And when we get so caught up in the negative emotions around our experience, that's what we call fusion. And mindfulness is one way of defusing from that kind of over-identification. We're going to have a practice of that if we get time as well. Okay, so you ready for a little practice? I build this workshop as a practical session. We're going to practice some of this. Now we're back to the right screen. We're going to do the self-compassion break exercise. Okay. And you can do this exercise at any time of the day or night when you think self-compassion might be what you need. Okay. And to practice this exercise, we actually need to turn towards a difficulty. And so I'm going to invite you to think of a difficulty or a little bit of suffering in your life right now. But I'm going to ask you, if this is something you've never done before, don't do it with your diagnosis. Don't do it with your blood cancer or leukemia. Don't do it with something really big, really, really big, the biggest thing in your life. Do it with something a little bit smaller. Maybe a little bit of a money issue, maybe a relationship irritation, something like that you're finding quite difficult at the moment. But I probably wouldn't do it with your health at this point unless this is something you've done a lot of before. And the reason for that is that practicing it for the first time and practicing it when you're just starting out can actually bring up some pretty strong emotions. And we're only in a 40-minute and 45-minute workshop with plus question time, 1 hour. So it's probably best to do it with something a bit smaller. So it might be a relationship problem. It might be something you're worried about that might happen. So I invite you to think of something now that is difficult, but not overwhelmingly difficult. Okay, so do that now. And if you don't want to do it, that's fine. Just sit this out. So call the situation to mind and see if you can actually feel the stress and emotional discomfort in your body. This is what I mean by turning towards the difficulty. Get in touch with that discomfort. What's going on? What happened or what might happen? Who said what? Bring that situation to life in your mind's eye. Now I'm going to say 3 phrases that will help us remember the 3 components of self-compassion when we need it most. The first phrase is, this is a moment of suffering. This is a moment of suffering. We're bringing mindful awareness to the fact that pain is present. And I invite you to find some language that speaks directly to you, like, this hurts. This is really hard right now. Ouch. In doing this, we're turning towards the difficulty, acknowledging it rather than pushing it away or running from it. This is really hard right now. This is a moment of suffering. The second phrase is, suffering is a part of life. Suffering is a part of life. We're reminding ourselves of our common humanity. In Te Reo, they say, he waka eke noa. We're all in the same waka. You can find your own words, and they can be something like, other people feel this way. Many people are going through similar situations. I'm not alone. We all struggle in our lives. The degree of suffering may be different. The flavor may be different. But suffering is a part of life for everyone in some way, without exception. It's part of being human. The third phrase is, may I be kind to myself. May I be kind to myself. To support bringing this kindness to yourself, I'm going to invite you to put your hands on your heart, okay? To feel the warmth of your hands and the gentle touch of your hands on your chest. Or place them on some other part of your body that feels soothing. Let those feelings of care stream through your fingers and your hands. You can ask yourself, what do I need to hear right now to express kindness to myself? What do I need to hear right now to express kindness to myself? And you can use any language that supports you, supports kindness towards yourself. Perhaps the same sort of words that you would use with a good friend that you cared about and who is going through a similar situation. So you might say something like, I'm here for you. I'm here for you. I care about you. Shaun, I'm so sorry. You can use your own name if that works for you. Anything that feels natural for you to express your deep wish that you be happy and free from suffering. Now, start to let go of the practice. Notice how your body is feeling right now. Allow any sensations to be just as they are. Allow yourself to be just who you are and how you are right in this moment. So this practice that we've just done can be used any time of the day or night. And it will help you if you say these 3 phrases. This is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of life. May I be kind to myself. Can help you remember those 3 aspects of self-compassion when you need it most. So there you go. There's a practical exercise. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a poem. I'm going to recite a poem to you. It's one of my favorite poems. It's called The Guest House, and it was written by, some of you may know it because it's actually a very famous poem, a poet by the name of Rumi, who lived in the 13th century. And he was born somewhere in Iran, I think. Well, no, near Afghanistan. And and he wrote a lot of poems. He was a Muslim, but he wrote a lot of poems. This is why I kind of had this East meets West kind of theme. But this is one of the more famous ones. So I'm going to recite it for you, and then I'm going to say why it speaks so much to me in the space of self-compassion and mindfulness. Okay, and it starts off, this being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. So, what do you think he meant by this poem? Was he saying that we should all be blown away by our feelings like tumbleweed? Should we just let the hurricanes of our emotions bowl in the front door and we just kind of roll with it? Actually, that's not what he was saying at all, because that's what I called earlier on, I called fusion, where we become over-identified in our emotions. We can choose to take actions that shift our mood. We don't have to just be hostage to each new arrival of joy, depression, meanness. But before we take action, before we can do that, we need to actually accept our own experiences. We can't keep the front door bolted. So this is what he was saying. You have to open the door and have the experience. And even if it's not kind of an experience that you're welcome, if you try and keep that front door really tightly bolted, eventually they're going to break it down anyway. Okay. And the other thing is that there's actually some positives that come with these negative emotions. So they're things like self-awareness. I did an earlier presentation as part of the blood cancer patient forum a couple of weeks ago. Some of you might have been there. One of the topics we covered was cultivation of positive emotions. And things, when I say positive emotions, things like gratitude and joy and so on. And we had some brief time for discussion. And one of the participants asked a really good question. They said, is it okay to have emotions like sadness and anger? And my answer was, yes, and that such emotions are just part of, our human experience. And I've reflected on that question a little bit more since. And I'd actually go further and say, who am I? Who am I? Who is anyone or anything to validate your emotions, positive or negative, positive or painful? Feelings, emotions are what they are. And in Rumi's poem, what he's saying is be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. So if you're constantly pushing away your feelings, then you're putting all your energy into fighting and keeping that guest house door shut to keep the unwanted visitors out. And that's exhausting. And what would happen if that anger that you felt was actually, had some kind of valuable message in there for how you should live your life? What is that anger about? What is that sadness about? What is it telling you about how you should live your life? What is it that you're angry about? What is it that you want more of? What is it that you're upset that's going to happen or not going to happen? What does that tell you about what you should do? So this is what he meant about they may have a message for you. Don't push away the feelings. Okay, so we feel things for a reason. Rather than mindset changes and trying to change the way you think, I'm going to propose something totally different, which is radical acceptance of your own emotions and thoughts. Okay, without necessarily having to roll in them, let them in. Then you can decide which ones are worth entertaining and which ones you'd rather see leave. And you can do things to shift your mood, but don't just kind of shove them all out the door, because that's not something you really want to think or feel. And this is what his poem was about. It's about honoring yourself and your own emotions and feelings. Okay, so in the interests of getting through and leaving some time for questions, I'm going to skip the next slide, which is about the difference between tender self-compassion and fierce self-compassion. If you want to find out more about that, you can see Kristen Neff's website up there. I would suggest you go and look at her website rather than me run through this. But one of the topics that was going to be part of the talk was mindset changes. And so I'm proposing that we don't actually cover mindset changes because, as I've just said, maybe we should be saying, instead of changing our minds, we should just simply start to change our bodies. So I'm going to propose that what we do is we do a little self-awareness practice, which is based on modern neuroscience, and it's called, so I'll just go past all this. It's called the mindfulness of breathing, okay? And so what is this thing called mindfulness? I'm sure some of you have practiced it before. Well, it actually means the opposite. It means this, mind emptiness. I went to the physio today and a young woman had an amazing jacket on. I wish I should have put this up on a slide. And on the back of her jacket, it said, think less. And that's kind of what mindfulness is about. It's not filling your mind up, it's actually emptying your mind. Okay, so what does that do for us? Well, it stops us living in the past, which is kind of gone. It's a bit of a fruitless pastime. It stops us living in the future that hasn't arrived, so there's not much we can do there. And it allows us to be fully present. And the thing that I like most about going to Waiheke Island, this sign is where you get off the ferry in Matiatia. I don't know if any of you know Waiheke, but you get there and you get off the ferry and you walk up to the village where you catch a bus up, and the first thing you see is the sign that says, slow down, you're here. And I love that because it's just such a neat reminder that, hey, You know, you've left the big city, you're there, there's nothing to do, actually. You should just slow down and just start to listen to the birds. And that's really what mindfulness is about. It's being fully present and realizing that you're not on the way to somewhere, you're actually already there. And so we're going to do a little brief mindfulness practice in the last few minutes and then open it up to questions, which is the mindfulness of breathing. Okay, so I want you, if you're sitting, to sit upright a little bit more. You don't have to do this. It'll take about 4 minutes or so. But if you do want to take part, sit up straight. So don't lean back on the chair. Make sure you're balancing on your sit bones. And I want you to make sure your feet are on the ground. Both feet are on the ground. If you're standing like me, your feet are definitely on the ground. And place your hands on your lap or on your thighs, either palms up or palms down, it doesn't matter. And I want you to close your eyes if you want. I'm just going to talk, so you'll be able to hear me, hopefully. If you don't feel comfortable closing your eyes, just soften your gaze and let the gaze go out of focus a little bit. And I want you first to notice, bring your attention to your feet, where they are seated on the ground. And I want you now, having noticed your feet on the ground, notice any sensations in your feet, any pressure, any warmth or coolness. Now bring your attention to your hands and notice the contact they're making with your lap or your thighs. Notice any slight pressure or sensation or temperature. And now bring your awareness from your hands to your seat and notice where you make contact with what you're sitting on. And notice the weight of your torso down on your sit bones and the pressure of your legs, the backs of your thighs on the seat. So notice where you're making contact with your seat. Soften the skin on your face. Relax your jaw. Start to notice your breath. Start by noticing each in-breath and out-breath. Notice the air flowing in through your nostrils and into your lungs. And notice your belly expand as you breathe in. And notice, without trying to change it, your belly relaxing as the air flows back out. Your diaphragm relaxes and the air flows back out through your nose. Notice the play of air on the side of your nostrils. Notice the slight temperature difference between the air going in and the air going back out with the out-breath. You're not trying to change your breath because your body knows just how to do this. It's done it all your life, and it will continue to do it all your life. You're just noticing it. Your body is breathing itself without you having to tell it what to do. If your mind starts to wander, which is perfectly natural, gently guide it back to noticing the breath, each in-breath and out-breath. Okay. Gently bring your awareness back from your breath to soften the skin on your face again and relax your jaw one last time. Bring your awareness back to your seat and once more notice the contact you're making with the seat. Now notice your hands again, where they're resting on your thigh or lap. Lastly, notice your feet making contact with the ground. Notice that sensation one last time. Having done that, very gently, if your eyes are closed, very gently let the room come back into focus, slowly and kindly. So that was a very, very brief introduction to mindful breathing. And that's the sort of thing that I do with my psychotherapy clients all the time, because often they're caught up in their minds, their busy minds, their thinking, and they're forgetting to breathe. And you can see people who forget to breathe because they sigh a lot. The body tries to make up the breath by sighing. And when you're concentrating on something really hard, particularly in front of the computer, often you can find that you forget to breathe and all of a sudden, especially when you're doing spreadsheets or accounts. So mindful breathing is a really good practice for you to calm your mind and to help your body. You don't have to do that practice. There are other ones. So some other mindful practices. I have a little mindful eating practice. I use a raisin and we practice it with groups of people where I give everybody a raisin and we take 15 minutes to eat the raisin. You're disqualified if you eat it before 15 minutes. So there you go. How many of you have really tasted a raisin? If you spend 15 minutes on one raisin, I can guarantee you'll be a convert to that. Walking in labyrinths. This is an ancient Christian tradition. Lots of old medieval churches and church gardens had labyrinths, and simply walking around in a set pattern is a very calming thing. And journaling. Some people like journaling. And that picture there kind of sums it up. Stuff's in this lady's head, and then by the time she's finished writing it all down, it's gone into the book, and her head's a bit lighter. Anyway, that is it from me. I've used up more than my time, so hopefully we might have time for a few questions. I'm going to stop my share somewhere. Oh, stop share. Here we go. Done. So back to you, Helen. Thank you, everybody. Happy to answer any questions.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
And it sounds fine?
Yes.
The gremlin's gone.
Yes, we've got rid of the Darth Vader voice. That's good.
Fabulous. Well, thank you, Shaun, for your time and for giving us those powerful tools to be kind to ourselves when we need it most. I certainly did that mindfulness breathing, and as I was worried about the speech, so that's fabulous. Now, just please remember, everyone, that if this talk has triggered some emotions or you want to discuss anything, then please do reach out to one of the local support coordinators. So we have some time for some questions. And the first one here is, I feel let down and don't trust my body after I got cancer. How do I love that part of myself?
Yeah. It's difficult, isn't it?
It is.
You know, I come back to something that I said earlier, and that is the breath is the thing that's always there for us. And, you know, I think sometimes it's as simple as getting in touch with the breath. You know, one of the slides that I showed was me kind of sitting there in a yoga session with some folk with this beautiful lagoon behind. I think I had it up when we were practicing the mindful breathing exercise. And I was teaching in the Solomon Islands right up till the pandemic, and we had to come back to New Zealand teaching yoga. It was a wonderful, wonderful gig, I can tell you. In a beautiful place. But people come up to me all the time and say, I want to practice this yoga. What do I need? And I'd say to them, well, you need three things. The first thing is you need a body. And they'd laugh. And they'd say, well, will this one do? And I'd say, well, what other choices have you got? And they'd say, well, what's the second thing? And I'd say, well, it needs to be breathing. And that would get a bit of a laugh because that's kind of self-evident, really. But the funny thing is, it's the thing that we take most for granted is our breath. And then the third thing, they'd say, what's the third thing I need to do to practice yoga? And I'd say, well, this is the hard bit. It's the really, really hard bit. You need to turn up. That's the bit the 99% fail. I think, Helen, you and I were having some discussion about turning up and doing webinars. So I guess the question is, when you feel let down, remember that you still have a body and remember that it's still breathing. And maybe that's the starting point. Maybe it's as simple as that, getting in touch with that and saying, hey, this is happening. This is happening. And let's be really aware of it, because the breath can be a great source of joy, even when you can't run a marathon.
Thank you. Just another question here. How can I balance my compassion for my partner and the stress they have due to my cancer against taking the time to be compassionate to myself? It makes me feel I'm taking even all the more time away from them.
Yeah, there's all these sorts of conflicts to kind of work through. And I think that self-compassion may be part of that answer, because even recognizing that is a difficult situation and having compassion for yourself and having to manage the difficulty and the conflict that brings up, and accepting that conflict is there and is a source of pain, you know, that could be a really good thing for that self-compassion break that we practiced. The other part of that is the slide that I did gloss through, which is the difference between accepting and gentle self-compassion versus fierce self-compassion. And fierce self-compassion, if I was to go back to that, in fact, can I do that really, really briefly? If I share my screen again very briefly, I'm going to go back to that particular slide, because I think it might speak a little bit to what we were just talking about. So on the right is we have this fierce self-compassion. This is where you take action. And some of this is around drawing boundaries, saying no and providing for your own needs. And it's that really difficult balance that you're talking about. I don't have the answer for you, but I do know that sometimes self-compassion involves kind of this balancing act between accepting yourselves and accepting yourself and being kind to yourself, but also putting up boundaries with other people and trying to decide what's fair for you and fair for others. Yeah. difficult situation. I hope that helps in some way.
Thanks, Shaun. Here's another one. I have a strong negative mindset default, which is unconscious, so I'm automatically identified with it. You mentioned mindset change, then dropped talking about it. Could you please briefly outline how to shift away from it?
Yeah, and so this comes back to this idea of choosing, if I understand the question right, is you understand you've got this bias in your thinking towards the negative emotions and negative outcomes and possibly rumination or whatever. But I mean, what you're talking about is self-awareness of that, which is great. So accepting that and understanding it and saying, well, actually, is this something that I want now, gives you the choice. So you've got the self-awareness, which is the first part of it. Then the question is, well, what do you want to do? What state would you like to shift to? And that's where cultivating positive emotions can be useful. So I did kind of poo-poo them a little bit in this workshop, but the reality is that you can practice cultivating positive emotions and it can be useful. And this is where you've done the acceptance work, but now you actually want to consciously make a choice to shift. And so things like, as we practiced in the last workshop that I was with you for, is something as simple as gratitude, where you might choose to give thanks for something and turn that into a habit, can start to shift the mood from some of the negative emotions to the positive emotions as well. And there's a lot that's been done that you can go online and have a look at under positive psychology and work by people like Martin Seligman and his movement in positive psychology. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff there.
Thank you. Just one more here. Do you have any suggestions for people who are always finding themselves thinking ahead and planning the next thing? I often feel like I have so much to do, so I need to be planning to make sure everything gets done. But at the same time, I just don't get to enjoy the present as much because of this.
Yeah, somebody talked about have the burden, particularly of people and families, and often it falls, and I don't want a gender stereotype, but often falls to the woman in the household. She becomes the rememberer, the person who's got to keep on track of what form needs returning to school, and have they booked this, and is this payment going out, and all that sort of stuff. And that's tremendous burden. And I guess one thing that I've heard from people that's useful is to kind of renegotiate some of this stuff, and that is to work with other people who might be able to take more accountability for some of these things, or prioritize them and decide what could be let slip. And remember that it's okay to be mediocre. It's okay to be late for some things. Don't be late for your own wedding, like 40-50 minutes late, like my wife was. I keep coming back to my wife, but that's because it's my wedding anniversary. But do decide, if there's some stuff that you can let go and it involves negotiating with other people, perhaps that could help some of that feeling that you've got to be across absolutely everything.
Thank you. I think that's all the time we have for questions. So just a reminder to everyone that this is being recorded. So just jump on to our link in our forum page to listen to this again. Next week, we'll have our closing session for the Blood Cancer Patient Forum. And Shaun talked about journaling, and this is it's titled Options to Support You. And we're talking about journaling and aromatherapy and therapeutic art. So it's a great segue into that. If you haven't yet registered yet, then just hop onto the link and do that. So now that the session has come to an end, it's been lovely spending this hour with you. And although Shaun can't hear you, I know that there's lots of claps and chorus of thanks in the background. So thank you to everyone.